Welcome, everyone, to the Nerd Journey Podcast, episode number 129. We're joining you every week to talk IT career progression and bring you the advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers. I'm your host, back again, John White, at BJourneyman on Twitter, joined by my co-host, Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_. Hey, Nick, how's it going?
Hey, John. I'm fine and dandy. It's great to have you back. We are both pre-sales technical engineers with backgrounds in IT operations. We hope our career discussions will be vendor neutral, relevant across disciplines, and remain timeless. If you're enjoying our content, please drop us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with us, tweet or DM at Nerd Journey. Ultimately, we're just two nerds on a journey.
A journey to virtual enlightenment.
So let's take a trip.
Awesome, Nick. This week, we are starting a new two-parter with Jon Towles. What was the thesis of this discussion?
So Jon actually came up through the mobility space, and he's made a career out of that, taking himself from administrator to engineer to architect. And I thought he wrote some very interesting blogs about that, and he also shares a few other things.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I thought that was his entry from retail into mobility was also really interesting. I thought that was something that if you're in the retail space and looking to get into like more of a skilled like IT job role, then maybe this is an episode for you. I really enjoyed his focus on documentation as kind of a superpower and a career accelerator, something that he's looked upon as a strength, creating documentation for the problems that he solved, and also a major lens that he for the discussion, like how he saw a career, was his neurodiversity, his ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. It's, I think, the first time on this podcast that we've had somebody else with that. It's something that I have. It's just not something that, I necessarily saw as like a lens through which I looked at the world. And it was interesting to see his focus on that. It was really eye-opening.
Yeah, some of the challenges I just didn't realize people have that are diagnosed with ADHD. So it was very eye-opening for me to get an understanding of a different viewpoint. Yeah,
same here. Just because we have the same diagnosis doesn't mean that we have the exact same experience. So it was very eye-opening for me. But without further ado, let's go ahead and roll part one of our interview with Jon Towles.
Jon Towles, thanks for joining us on the Nerd Journey.
Thanks, Nick. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I think we're going to have a good conversation. For our listeners out there, can you share a little bit about who you are and what you do today?
Sure. Kind of give my journey real quick. So late to IT, retail manager for about 12 years. Started IT around the age of 29 or so. Been through many places in the mobility world and industry. At this point, I am now a VMware partner. As part of the IT wing of my wife's multi-million-dollar pharma organization, and I work with various clients on different EUC technologies, mainly in the UEM space, focusing on mobility around Mac OS, Android, iOS, Windows 10, that type of thing.
And what was it that got you into the technology space in the first place?
So honestly, I never really wanted to be in IT, I don't think. So somebody who was, I grew up like about as nerdy could be. And, I was a gamer, like hardcore. I wish I was born this time. I probably would have been able to get into the e-game stuff. I realize as I've gotten older that I don't have the reaction time to play video games all that well anymore. But, back in the day, when to age myself, esports for me growing up was the NBA Jam tournament at Blockbuster Video, which is, if anyone can remember that was esports when I was growing up. I never wanted to do it. I was in retail for a long time. I was very fortunate enough to kind of met my wife to put me on the right path. Back then I was like 310 pounds or something like that, which I'm now, 200 pounds. And she kind of helped me refocus. She pushed me to go and I went and got my A+. I went and did my degree online, got my bachelor's, and she kind of pushed me to kind of finally get out of retail. And I did. And I got very fortunate that led me to working for Blackberry. And it was a very interesting challenge for me because I was working with all these people who had been principals at Microsoft for like 10 years. And I was like 2 years into IT, and it was tough. And I tell you, the great thing about ADHD is if you can channel it, you can compete with anybody if you have the drive and the effort, because you have so much energy that if you actually have the drive and you're willing to put that effort in, you can rise to that occasion against anybody. And that's what I basically had to work harder than anybody else, trying to keep up with them. And I'm really fortunate because that time and effort I put in over probably a 5 or 6 year stint got me to a point where I just know I can understand and figure out any technology now. I've just been so thankful and fortunate for that, because like I said, everyone gets opportunities, but can you make the most of them and turn them into something special? And I've been fortunate that I've been able to. And like I said, I'm just very lucky from that perspective.
John, can I ask you, from that A+ certification, that's kind of like a generalist certification.
Yeah.
What steered you in the direction of working for a company like Blackberry?
Sure. I think that's a good question. So the last retail job I had was at Verizon. And so this was 2009. And if we date that back, 2009 was when Verizon first got the iPhone. And so what I was doing at the time is I was working in this little Verizon store that was a franchise. And what I was doing is I was actually doing like Blackberry training with customers for the store. Like I would actually like teach them how to use Blackberries. I started selling all these different Blackberry services and kind of learning mobility. And so once I got my A+, I lucked out. And the hardest thing in the world really is when you're trying to transition into IT and you come from a non-IT background. I had such a hard time getting someone to give me a shot in IT because I just figured, look, you as a retail person, right? It's very, very tough. And being completely honest with you, and I'm very respectful to the many different plights and diversity, it is as hard to get people to take you seriously and get a job when you're 300 pounds as it is with almost but many different diverse areas. Cause there's a lot of, honestly, there's people just judge you. And I'll tell you, I've had a significantly easier time getting jobs when I weigh 200 versus when I weigh 300. And I just was really fortunate that I got one person to give me a chance. And that's what it comes down to, right? When IT is, you need to get that one person to give you a shot, and you have to be willing to kind of put in the time and take advantage of it. And I did. And I had this company that is no longer exists called On Demand Communications. They gave me a shot. They had a government consulting firm in Virginia, and I went in as a Blackberry administrator, basically enrolling Blackberries and shipping them out and doing basic Blackberry administration. And that it kind of was a jumping off point because I did that. I did great. They were having a lot of financial issues, as startups tend to. And I went from that to contracting. And then after that one contract job, I shot in the dark. I applied at Blackberry. I got in, and honestly, the rest is history. It's just all about, my whole life, I live on everything I do is all about effort. And so I do a lot of mentoring, even with my client, I do a lot of mentoring. And my whole thing is if you give me effort, I'll do whatever I have to do to help you be successful. But that's a big thing for me is I need to see people who are actually going to put in effort. They're going to try, and they're just going to show me that they want it. Right. Because I think that in my opinion, when I look at somebody and like what their upward mobility is and what they can really be, like I usually look at their effort, and I look at what kind of mind they have. And I was thinking about this today. I think if you have the right mindset and your mind works in a very specific way, even if you're inexperienced, you can be very, very good. And I think that I always kind of put it down to intangibles, because honestly, in my industry in mobile, it's like one of the only things in IT you can't go to school for. And so a lot of it is kind of battle tested and learning stuff. Cause I mean, you look at everything, like even like InfoSec, right? That there's all degrees and stuff for that now, but mobility, it's really tried and tested, and then learning stuff and kind of moving and shifting and developing, I think.
Yeah, that's really an interesting point. I think that there are more and more places where you can actually, get training these days in IT. Although I think we still joke around and like I think InfoSec might be it feels like one of the few places, but you can't go to college and get like a sysadmin like degree, right? Or I suppose that there is IS degrees.
I think they're mostly massive. I think they're mostly master's programs now, aren't they? I think a lot of the infosec stuff. There's a lot. There are a few master's degree programs in like forensics and like cybersecurity that I have seen people go and get. I mean, I have never gone for one because I'm not a huge proponent, and like I know people feel differently. I'm not a big proponent of like, oh, I should go get my MBA and stuff like that. I just don't think it translates that well in IT, and I know a lot of people feel differently than me, but I think that having a bachelor's degree is good. It's not a requirement. It's good. I just think that, there's diminishing returns past bachelor's in IT. I just the way I view it. I know a lot of people feel differently about that. And I just don't like school. I have ADHD. People don't get it. I have not read a book I've enjoyed since I was 10 because you cannot focus. Like literally the last book I read, I think was from the Gunslinger trilogy, the Dark Tower series.
Yeah.
Like that was literally the last book I read. I was like 10 years old on the train in Boston with my grandmother. It's like literally the last time I was able to read a book for enjoyment, because when you have ADHD, you just can't focus. Like I wrote in my article, right? My brain is like HTTP2. It's like multi-threaded. So like I'll be reading a book and then I'll start to go, oh, later I have to do this. Oh, and did this. And like, my brain is just moving in so many different directions, like constantly. Like it's impossible to kind of focus on that one thing. And I think that it's really all about like what you make of it. Like it's just, can you turn your quote unquote symptoms into strengths? I think that's just kind of how I look at it. But like, yeah, I don't think they really understand a lot of those struggles unless you have to deal with them. It's very difficult to really, I think, grasp.
It's interesting. It's a collision of, at least in IT, like a lot of IT is descended from telecoms, right? And telecoms was a real like master journeyman apprentice system, not like a college degree system. So I see a lot of it still growing out of that, although there's a lot more.
No, you're right. I did that before I worked for Blackberry. I was doing TEMS. I was doing telecom expense management stuff along with my Blackberry job. You're having to like import like the Verizon bills and then doing all that nonsense, having a call. It was not particularly enjoyable, especially when you work at a place. When I was doing it, they had all 4 carriers. They were like a hospital trust, so they owned like buildings all across the country. It was not enjoyable. Oh, why is this person in AT&T? They're in New York. It's like, yeah, it's just like I guess I don't know if it was interesting work, but it was certainly involved work. It was good work for somebody with my kind of health issues because it is so much stuff there that it certainly keeps you busy, at least to a degree.
For sure. And you mentioned that you were on a team with a lot of very experienced folks. They had been principals at other companies. How did they take to having someone that they perceived was less experienced on the team?
What I found to be really useful is honestly kind of so I'll be honest, there are good and bad things about being in Texas, right? Because I mean, the biggest, I don't know if you could say it's bad, is that people.
I don't see any downsides, John.
Well, it's not anything about Texas itself. I loved Texas. It's about somebody like me from New England and getting people in Texas to understand me as a person, right? Because many people in Texas, and there's so many stereotypes about Texas, but many people in Texas, they're relatively, let's say, laid back, right? They can be a little more timid to a degree. At least in my experience. And like, us Bostonians, we're loud and we are what we are, right? And we're very, blunt people. And it's even worse when you have ADHD, you're like extra blunt, if that's possible. But like, and that was the hardest thing, right? I think with me is like these people. And I guess the great thing about me is I never really showed it. Like, even though that I was on this with all these people, I was one of the top performers, and I made it to the very last round of layoffs because, I guess one of the things I really took from being at Blackberry that I learned is that, own things. Like, don't make up something. Like, it's okay to say, let me look into that. I'll get back to you. Like that kind of stuff. Like, and and I found ways to provide value in other ways because like the main reason that Blackberry gave me the job was that I came with soft skills, I came with technical writing aptitude. Like, I was willing to actually put in the time and document stuff. Like I really loved doing like health checks, and like I was willing to put in all that time. One of the things I loved, and everyone hates BMC Remedy, but one of the things I loved about BMC Remedy, and I never really hated it. I don't think I had enough experience to hate it, but everyone always talks about how much they hate BMC Remedy. The thing that I loved is whenever I closed a ticket there, I had to link it to a KB article. And if that KB article didn't exist, I had to write and submit one, which I loved because like, it's just like, let's always love the concept of showing your work. Like, and I've always really pushed on that. It's like, help me understand like how you got to that point, like how you got to that conclusion. And like I said, honestly, like I said, most of the people I worked with at Blackberry, were relatively decent. Like, I'm not saying that every place has certain people, but like they were, relatively pretty, easy to work with. Like I'm sure people would get tired. I'd ask questions, just kind of, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Because I've always kind of felt like I want to be really collaborative and I always loved involving people in the journey, quote unquote. And I just always kind of enjoyed that. And yeah, it was tough, but like I said, but I figured out, well, where do I go to look for stuff? So I would spend hours digging through their Confluence, like digging through software engineering documentation and trying to figure out how X thing worked. Because what made me, I guess, unique is that I never had a Splunk. I never had a Sumo Logic. I was literally using like Notepad++ and opening like 1 gigabyte Java files. You couldn't do that in Notepad++. I think I was using a Glog or something, but you could never do that. You literally so I had to like do things like that. And then I guess because of the way my mind worked is I guess I enjoyed the journey. Like, okay, let me Control F, like, find in files, the word error. Oh, okay. Does this give me any information? So I really built a lot of really great core skills, especially around troubleshooting and like looking at logs and trying to figure out a lot of that kind of stuff. And I enjoyed that, but it was also a double-edged sword because that's actually when I really decided I had to take my disease more seriously because the thing that people don't realize when you have ADHD, when you actually read, you actually use twice as much, if not more energy than twice as much when you actually try to you look at logs, you do any kind of intensive reading, it drains your energy. I was actually falling asleep on the way home from work. And I was sleeping, I don't sleep a lot, but I was sleeping, it's not like I was staying up all night like I used to in my video gaming days, but literally, I would just fall asleep at the wheel on the way home from work to get home. And that's when I started taking it seriously. And that's actually when I started taking, taking Ritalin to actually help me stay awake. And that was literally when I started doing that was for that reason. It was because I was spending hours on hours looking at these logs, trying to figure out issues and stuff like that. And it was great. I was really, really good at it. And I still am really good at it. But I think it was an interesting thing for me is that I never really showed that, I was overwhelmed. I guess that's one of the good things about me from a technical perspective, that I just don't really get overwhelmed by stuff. I'm, I guess, inquisitive, and I like to try to figure out how things work and understand.
I really like that thing that you said about linking closing tickets to having to explain, and basically give back to the pool of people that you're working with, right? Hey, this is how I solved the problem, and since it's not documented everywhere, let me make sure that it is documented. I think that if people don't have that instinct and they're not forced to do it by a structure, they should be doing it anyway. That's just good for your career.
Oh, I agree. And the problem is that everyone is so paranoid all the time. They just don't they don't like sharing. They don't like showing their work. I worked with somebody at MIT who literally refused to share his documentation. He hid it all on his desktop. It would not put it on their I was going to say LMS, but it's not LMS. I was trying not to use the name of the product, but it's not SharePoint, but it's a SharePoint adjacent product.
A knowledge base article.
I guess share or whatever. But yeah, he refused to share documentation. I just never understood that whole concept of people are so afraid to show stuff and share what they're doing, what they've done, and they don't like to document. They don't like to do any of that kind of stuff. And it's people are just they're just too tactical and they're not strategic enough in their mindset that when you document, when you share information, whether it's with your team, whether it's with your help desk, whoever it is, inevitably you're benefiting everybody. And they never really got that. They just always, the problem is I think a lot of people, they always felt like it was beneath them. Like they didn't want to do this. They didn't want to do that. I mean, it just drives you so crazy. Like every time you open a ticket with whatever vendor it is, like they can go to their internal tickets and they can find the answer to that problem, but that problem never made it into a knowledge base with that vendor. There's stuff, this information should be shared. Like that's literally the whole point. And if you're actually good at your job, it doesn't matter if where your information is, if it's out there or not. Because if you're good at your job, you don't have to worry about that. It should not be something you should be that worried about. It should be more important thinking about what's good for your company, not what's good for you.
I think there's this perception that knowledge is power. And if I share all this knowledge with other people, then they're going to get promoted faster than me or something like that, or I'm not going to be as valuable to the organization. At least it was that way when I worked in a manufacturing environment, at least for the folks who were on the shop floor. They seemed to be very guarded about what they wanted certain people to know how to do and sharing that information. That's just my opinion.
I think I was going to say exactly the same thing, but also maybe to attach a judgment to it, right? Especially in knowledge work, like, what we call knowledge work these days. I think that if your job security is attached to the idea that you know things that other people in your organization don't know, and if you give that knowledge, quote unquote, give that knowledge away, you won't be valuable to the organization anymore, then there's probably a couple things wrong there. If that's true, then you probably should find somewhere else to work, right? And if it's true about, and that's a judgment on the organization. If it's true about you, then I think that you might think that it's true, but that's hopefully it isn't. Hopefully the thing that is valuable about you is your ability to figure out that knowledge, not the fact that you happen to have it and nobody else does.
Yep. I worked at a large retailer, and I always said in IT, there's three types of people. There are people that are good with people. There are people that are technically strong. Then there are the people who pretend that they're technically strong and can fool the people that are good with people, but not the people that are technical. Like I always felt like IT people, you kind of lumped in those three things, right? Like you had the people who they weren't the most technical people, but they were really good with users, right? They just were, whether it's an analyst or whatever. And then you had people who were, and obviously the people who were super technical was a very small percentage of them. But then you had a lot of those people who tried to fake it. They were all about fake it till they make it, right? And the only person that actually knew that they were full of it was the people that were really technical. And so a lot of times that they could, and it's like, I just never believed in that whole idea, right? Is that because eventually it catches up to you at the end of the day, right? And it's like, I've always felt that if you put in the work and you're willing to put in the time, you can get to anywhere you want to be. It's just, the reality is, there aren't a lot of people that want to put that in. And I don't know, I never understood the why, like why they feel that way. Maybe it's just because I have a lot of energy and I have to do things the right way. And I understand that sometimes doing things the right way means you're going to work a lot more hours. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. And I've always been terrible at work-life balance, I guess. But like, I just rather put in the time and the effort because I just would not sleep at night if I knew I did stuff.
It's interesting. I think maybe my observation on that would be you're leaving out the like interest in the topic, right? Because I there's in general things that don't necessarily 100% align with what I'm interested in. I can still like power through it, if it's important to my job, because it's generally aligned with what it is that my general interests are. But if I had to power through something that was totally orthogonal to what I cared about, it would be like, orders of magnitude more difficult.
What's different about me is, and I think it's because I grew up as the product of a single mother, is that I have this like need to make others happy. It's part that I guess all technology interests me because I'm Holmesian enough, and by saying Sherlock Holmesy enough that I love the puzzle. Like I like figuring out how stuff works, and I like to figure out how to solve a problem. Like someone says, I really want to be able to do this. And so I love being able to figure that out. And I find all technology is interesting to me. I just love being able to do stuff that nobody does. Like, so a lot of what like my blog and I do is I take stuff that is really poorly documented that nobody knows how to do, and I figure it out. Like I'm like become like the authoritarian on like unified access gate, which nobody understands. Like as an example, 75% of the clients I have right now are because I'm like the only person who knows how to do the secure email gateway with Kerberos authentication. And I can't believe it or not. Yeah, there are that many people who actually still use on-prem Exchange, believe it or not. But yeah, but like, it's just like, I don't know. I love the puzzle. Like I love figuring out stuff that like nobody knows how to do. Because this is an inevitable problem that we deal with a lot on the VMware EUC side, is that when new products come out, they're not always ready, right? And so I end up getting this opportunity to actually like, let's take this thing that nobody knows how to do, let me figure it out and see if I can actually make it work. And I guess I love that whole idea of it. And it always just blows my mind when I hear about these people will either like, I got a message the other day literally saying that my blog is the reason they went into mobility. And that like blew my mind. Like I just couldn't even fathom it. To kind of talk about ADHD for a second. I read something today. It was so, and I don't know if you're the same way, John, but the problem with ADHD is you spend a lot of time in your internal dialogue. Like you analyze conversations you had that day to see, is this because I'm me, or could I have done something different? What is the problem? And I read an article today. It was really interesting. And they said that one of the new symptoms that they've done studies on for ADHD is that you have highs and lows of how you deal with emotions. Like, so sometimes a situation will come up and you'll react to it way more than you should have. But then other situations will come up and you won't react at all. And so something that like should not bother you that much will bother you more for whatever reason. And this is a new symptom. Like they haven't actually said, written this in as a symptom of ADHD, but the emotional like peaks and valleys are a big challenge. And it's something that I hadn't thought about it, but I started analyzing it. And I said, I don't know if you ever do this, someone with ADHD is like, I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about stuff like, okay, so I had this issue or this disagreement with somebody today. And it's like, what did I do wrong here? Like, how do I, fix this? Because you are kind of, in a way, prejudiced against when you have ADHD. And because like they just think that like you're crass or you're this or you're that. And a lot of people don't necessarily understand it or how hard it is, like to have no filter and not be able to control that. And like, I don't know if you've ever read any of this stuff. There are people who can't even work with other people because their ADHD symptoms are so severe. And that just blows my mind. Like, I just can't even imagine that.
Interesting.
That's wild.
I don't think that ADHD and, being on the autism spectrum are the same. They get lumped in together, but it's not the same. It is kind of like, the thing that, makes me, remark on it is the phrase or descriptor neuroatypical, right? Like, I think that word does cover both things, right? But I think the way people's minds work on, both of those, the autism spectrum and then probably ADHD is probably a spectrum too, is like, it's different ways of working, which are different from being neurotypical. I don't know if you buy that.
Yeah, if you just look at the etymology of that word, it totally makes sense, right? When you just break it down and you're like, oh yeah, that 100% completely fits. Like I literally, being very honest, I literally had a director who told me more or less that I was being held back because of ADHD and that, I'm smart enough to fix it. I was like, yep, glad I'm leaving there. It's just so condescending. Like people have no idea how difficult it is. And this is the same reason why people don't know that their people have ADHD. It's because nobody is I just own it. I'm good with it. And I know, like I said, there's going to be good days and bad days. Like it's so hard to turn that filter off. Like somebody will say something that's just like blatantly incorrect and you have a hard time not correcting them in that meeting. And it's like, you try and sometimes you're going to succeed, but a lot of times you're going to fail at that. And people they just really don't get it. And the big difference is between having ADHD and being toxic is that there's no malcontent. And I don't think they get that, is that like when we do it, we're doing it really from a good place. So we're trying to help or we're trying to be decent. Whereas other people are doing it because they're just.
Right. Coming from a bad place as opposed to coming from a good place.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I've worked in enough toxic environments, and it's like it just people don't understand that. And I'll tell you, I've had one manager who ever really got it. His name was Dan Smith. I worked for him at Talbot's until he left. He's now at Proof Point. He the sweetest man I've ever met. Like, he's a Jehovah's Witness, super, super, just like amazingly decent person. And he just got it. He understood. He understood, he was a good advocate. He understood this, help, kind of like a translation engine for Jon, right? And just would help explain, this is, it's coming from a good place, and like just helping people try to understand kind of what that's like. Cause like I said, nobody gets it. I mean, back in the 80s, so I'm 41, I grew up in the 80s. Back then, right? So I didn't even know I had ADHD until I was 29, and I was tested when I was like 8. Basically, when I was moving out of my house, getting ready to move with my wife, I found some old papers of my mother's, and I actually found where it actually said I was diagnosed with ADHD. But back in the 80s, a lot of parents were terrified because they want to put everybody in Ritalin. Ritalin had a really bad rep back then. Like that was like those old Chris Rock Robitussin jokes where basically it was like Ritalin was like the thing for, they just threw a bunch of things at Ritalin. And so a lot of people didn't do it. And, it really, I think, helped me understand a lot about kind of, I think, who I am. And I think at the end of the day, right, is that if people need to understand and we'll get nerdy for a second, but it's kind of like the whole Infinity Gauntlet in the Avengers, right? It's about like with ADHD, do you know how to harness that energy? Do you know how to take that person? It's about, like you take people and you try to play to their strengths and stuff like that. And it's about, do you know how to take that person and harness their power and their energy for good? Or do you just write them off? And I think that if you know how to harness that person's strengths and leverage them, then, you can have somebody that's as good, if not better than everybody else, just point blank. And it mystifies me that people don't realize how much good you can do with somebody who has that level of energy and all that. And they just look at this person's disruptive. This person's not going to work. They're not going to be this. They're not going to be that. It's just, it blows my mind in this day and age that people don't try to play people to their strengths instead of just, throwing them to the wolves.
I think what you're talking about and touching on is a prejudice against having the diagnosis, right? Just like something that's fading away, kind of like, the fading prejudice against having a mental health diagnosis, right? And you can actually kind of look at that from the language that people used about ADHD, oh, I can't believe they're just like doping up kids on Ritalin, which is just exposes a fundamental misunderstanding about the medication, right? Like it's a stimulant, and the only way that a stimulant will calm you down is if you have ADHD, right? So they're talking about the diagnosis right there and the medication that treats the diagnosis with just a lack of understanding about it at all.
It's the Hollywoodification of Ritalin, right? Like they saw it in this movie or that movie, and so they automatically like, buddy, it's not meth, okay? It is Ritalin.
Well, they don't talk about it as if it were like the stimulant, like meth. Yeah. They talk about it as if it's a tranquilizer. At least that's the way it used to be talked about in the 80s and 90s. Like you're tranquilized. Oh, your kid is hyperactive, so he's going to be tranquilized by Ritalin, which makes absolutely no sense, right?
I still remember the time that the first time when I took my methylphenidate with my my Diet Coke, and I felt like my heart was going to stop because it took the Ritalin plus the caffeine all at once.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, no more caffeine in the morning at all. So the worst part about having ADHD is your ADHD makes you forget and second guess, did you take your medication that morning?
That's really interesting.
I think I took it. I'm not really sure. Maybe. Yeah, I've had a few of those moments where I have to try to replay it in my mind.
Can you tell us about it's so interesting. I've read some of your articles, like the the Finding the Right Manager article and the politics around ADHD. And we'll definitely put links to those in our show notes. Can you talk a little bit about the path to just being open with it and just like publishing it? Because I certainly, like, I'm not afraid to tell somebody that I have an ADHD diagnosis. I just don't like maybe announce it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you're so open about it. And I was just wondering if you could explain like the path to how you got there.
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, the article, I guess it kind of came on a whim. Like, I was reading about, so my wife and I, we own a pharma company. We work with several clients. We work on stuff for the FDA and stuff like that, like the submissions of drugs and stuff like that. And so I realized it was Mental Health Awareness Month, and I was really thinking about it. And so what it really came down to was like, and I was talking about this a little bit earlier, is it always surprises me when I hear about people that have read my stuff and it actually matters. So to give you the history, so the very first VMworld I went to, my best friend, this was after basically AirWatch Connect, rest in peace, the greatest conference that ever existed. When we went away and we were forced to go out to Vegas, to VMworld, my first time in Vegas. But I went to some session about it was like mobile email management, like best practice or something. And they asked me if I had a blog. I'm like, no. And so that kind of got me to the idea of writing, because as someone with ADHD, the whole reason I always was really strong with technical writing is that was a skill that I had learned, helped me learn and memorize stuff. Because when you have ADHD, you learn a little bit differently. You're hands-on. You can't just nothing is harder than trying to get certified when you have ADHD, because you just can't memorize stuff. It's almost impossible. Like, practice tests are the only thing that really have ever been even remotely effective. I can't get a certification outside of mobility. I just don't know this stuff well enough. Like, even though I worked in AWS did AWS stuff for 3 years, I couldn't even pass that test. Like, no matter how much I do, it's just impossible. And so anyway, going back to what I was saying is that, so I thought about that, and it blew me away. Cause like I said, I just been writing it to kind of just throw stuff out there. And it always just shocked me. People, when I first presented it, my first presentation was at VMworld in 2018 on basically VIDM at the time, VMware Identity Manager. I had people coming up to me telling me how important my blog was to them and how much it helped them. And it really blew me away. And then I guess I had this moment of clarity last month when I realized, what I'm doing actually matters, which is weird to me, but it does. And, is it my responsibility, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month, to make a difference here? That, if people are actually reading my stuff and what I'm saying actually matters to these people, then isn't it my job to be an advocate for ADHD? Because I've been relatively open about it, because I guess I just don't care. I've never really cared all that much what people kind of think of me, because I guess I came up a mobile guy, right? And mobile people, we have no respect. Because what happens is 99% of the time, they don't want to pay for a mobility person. So most companies I went to some company who had never had a mobility person before. And so they bring me in, I do all my stuff, and, we're just in general never really been well respected. And part of that is that most mobile people are administrators, and, they're just not, they're good at very specific stuff. And there's always just been a lot of misnomers about what they can or can't do. And so in some companies, they'd really push me to do this or do that. I'm getting a little off topic here, I guess. But the idea is that I just don't care what people think, because if I did, I would just crawl into a shell and die, because mobility people, we just we don't get respect at all. Because even honestly, when they decided to merge VDI and mobility together, that was the worst thing that could have happened to us, because now we're even less important, because everyone cares about Horizon. Nobody really cares about mobility, to be honest with you. They say they do, but it's not. We're just not as sexy as VDI. I mean, I can't really blame them. I mean, VDI. I mean, especially in COVID, it's huge. And so I guess I don't really think about that too much. But I realize that I need to really. I can make a difference here. And so I kind of decided to talk about it and talk about the struggles I've seen and what I've dealt with, and, kind of what I've tried to do about them. And I think, honestly, the number one thing I learned with my diagnosis in ADHD is that I'm going to own it I'm not defensive. If I make mistakes, I own them. It's fine. It happens. And, and it's a big shift from a lot of people in IT. A lot of people in IT are always trying to kind of play CYA and trying to kind of make sure that they look good. I've always just believed my work's going to speak for me. And I have to be really, really great at what I do, because if I'm not, people are going to use my interpersonal issues against me at every turn. And that's what for me, that's what happens, right? Is that my technology can stand on its own 2 feet. And so people can't use that, but they've used, the fact that, one of the biggest struggles I have is the fact I don't always understand when people stop talking. And that's an ADHD symptom. And so sometimes I may speak over somebody and it's not intentional. It's just kind of what happens. I have, like I said, I have stuff like that. And the fact that I'm so just straightforward and blunt and those things are tough. And it's part of who I am, and I'm good with it. And like, even sometimes, the problem is I'm also Catholic. And so I feel bad about it afterwards. And then I go back and say, just so you know, I'm not trying to do this, but this is kind of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Did you hear it, everybody? Jon Towles was another one of those folks who just needed a chance to show the world what he can do. Starting at Blackberry, working with all these people who he felt had way more expertise than he did. And he was able to do some incredible things. And we'll hear more about his career path a little bit next week. But I want to say a kudos to Jon for being so open and vulnerable with the community here. Not everyone who has a diagnosis that they feel others might look down on them for or view as a weakness is really willing to talk about it. That's a hard thing, I think, and it takes a lot of guts to get on a podcast and say something like that.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it really harkens back to other guests that we've had, like Cody Darkland, episodes 85 and 86, I think. And Mike Burkhart, too. Like, I think most recently we had him back for episodes 109 and 110. Those are also, like, interesting guests that we've had with unique points of view who've been just really willing and open to, share their experiences, and, even be a little bit vulnerable and really open themselves up. And I really liked how Jon really felt that this was not like a disadvantage that he had, but it was a strength, that he brought to an organization. I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that in the next episode next week. So I won't try to undercut that content that's coming to you soon. Anyway, do you want to get out of here?
Just a reminder, we want people to subscribe and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. We want to know if we're being helpful and are always looking for interesting questions to ponder. We're collectively on Twitter at Nerd Journey.
All right, farewell listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios. Just snap your fingers with the Infinity Gauntlet and it'll be next week before you know it.